They said she was born under a red moon, and that anyone born that night was marked by the devil. They said she could talk snakes out of their skins, that she could charm a man's soul straight out his body, and that her footsteps made crops wilt. But most of all, they said she laughed when men died. Her name was Marjorie, but on the plantations of Nightshade Row, she was called the Widow, not because she ever had a husband, but because every man who tried to claim her ended up in a grave. No one knew her true age. No one knew where she came from. All they knew was that she had been sold 3 times, escaped twice, beaten once to the edge of death, and still lived with a smile like she knew something no one else did. When the Klan began rising in the Louisiana parishes, burning crosses and dragging people from their cabins, they should have left the widow alone. But hatred makes men stupid, and 8 Klansmen were the stupidest of them all. They tried to teach her a lesson. They wanted to break her. They wanted to make an example out of her. By sunrise, all 8 would lay dead in the dirt, clutching their throats, eyes bulging, while the widow stood over them, laughing like a woman who had been waiting her whole life for justice. This is how it began. The night the Klansmen came for her, the air was so still that even the frogs held their breath. The cicadas fell silent. The swamp birds tucked themselves into the trees. It was as if the whole world sensed the violence creeping through the woods. Marjorie stood in her small cabin, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. Her hands moved slow, calm. Her smile was faint but steady, like she was listening to a joke only she could hear. A soft knock tapped at her door. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice smooth as molasses. A young boy's whisper answered, sharp with fear. "Miss Marjorie. They comin'. 8 of 'em. Horses too." She didn't look afraid. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door. When she opened it, she saw the boy trembling, sweat beading across his forehead despite the night chill. "Where are they now?" she asked. "Crossin' the cane field. They got ropes, guns, torches." Marjorie bent down, cupped the boy's cheek gently, and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Go on home. Lock your mama's door. Don't look out the window." "But—" "Go," she said, and when she said it, he obeyed. The moment he ran, Marjorie straightened her back and inhaled deeply. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of whiskey, sweat, and arrogance. The men were getting closer. She went to her table, lifted the cloth covering a wooden crate, and removed a small bottle of deep red wine. The glass was old and cloudy, but the liquid inside glowed like garnet in the lamplight. Her smile widened. "Been savin' you for a special night," she whispered. Then she placed 8 pewter cups in a row. The Klansmen stopped outside her cabin with the loud clatter of hooves and boots. Their hoods glowed pale in the moonlight. One of them kicked her door so hard it shook on its hinges. "Come on out, witch," he snarled. She opened the door slowly, so slowly it unnerved them. She did not bow. She did not tremble. She stood in her doorway with her hair loose, falling over her shoulders like a black waterfall. "Evenin', gentlemen," she said sweetly. "You thirsty?" Her politeness confused them. Stupid men always slowed down when they were confused. "Hear you like threatenin' folks," another spat. "Hear you like talking to the devil," said a third. She shrugged. "If the devil comes knockin', I won't be rude." Laughter rippled through them, harsh, mocking. That was when she stepped aside. "Come in," she said. No reason to stand outside like stray dogs. Their pride outweighed their suspicion. They marched in, filling her cabin with the stink of sweat and cruelty. She poured wine into each of the 8 cups with slow, deliberate grace. "Drink," she said. "If you're gonna kill me, least you can do is toast to it." They roared with wicked laughter. The men raised their cups. Some knocked them back in one motion. Others drank in small sips, savoring the sweetness. But sweetness is a strange thing, especially when it hides something darker. Within 60 seconds, the tallest man's face twisted. What's wrong with?" he gasped, grabbing his throat. 30 more seconds and a second man fell to his knees, choking so violently his hood ripped open. The others panicked. "You poisoned us!" one shrieked, eyes bulging. Marjorie leaned against her table, arms crossed, smile wide enough to show every perfect white tooth. "No," she said softly. "You poisoned yourselves." They thrashed. They gagged. They clawed at their necks until their nails split. She watched calmly, head tilted like she was evaluating a painting. Then, when the first man collapsed, gasping his final breath, she laughed. Not cruelly, not wildly, but joyfully, like a woman finally free. By the time the eighth man fell, the only sound left in the cabin was her soft humming a tune older than the land, older than their hate. She stepped over the bodies and walked out into the moonlight. 8 down, she whispered to the stars. Plenty more to go. The next evening arrived with a strange stillness, as if the air itself held its breath. Cicadas buzzed, a lonely rhythm rising and falling across the quiet pines. Lila set her hand on the old cedar table in her kitchen hut, feeling the grooves carved by 15 years of chopping herbs, mixing remedies, grinding roots. But tonight, she was grinding nothing. Tonight, she was waiting. Word traveled fast among men who believed themselves powerful, faster still among cowards who hid behind sheets. By sundown, Lila knew. The men responsible for Samuel's death, the ones who had dragged him into the swamp and left his body for gators, were coming. Not with ropes this time, not with torches, but with thirst. In grief, they sought comfort. In guilt, they sought numbness. They convinced themselves they came to her cabin for wine, for distraction, for the novelty of a widow's company. But Lila knew their nature better than they knew themselves. Men who killed at night liked to pretend in daylight that they were civilized. The moon rose round, swollen, watching. Footsteps sounded outside, heavy boots scraping dirt. Lila didn't look up until the first white hood dipped below her doorway. 7 more followed, one by one, ducking into the smoky warmth of her hut. They kept their masks on, as if cloth could hide their stench. Lila kept her face calm, her heartbeat slow, her breathing steady. None of the men noticed the faint shimmer of something oily on the wine jug's rim. "Evenin', widow," the tallest one said, trying to sound bold. "Heard you were lonely." She smiled, a small, soft, tired thing. "I've been lonely a long time." Laughter echoed off the low ceiling, rough and barking. They spread around the room, filling her space with the bitter scent of sweat and gunpowder. One man leaned so close she could smell stale whiskey trapped beneath his hood. "We brought silver," another said, shaking a pouch. "You pour us a drink. We forget we ever seen your face." "Then drink," Lila said gently. "Drink, and forget everything you ever done." She poured the first glass, the scarlet liquid glinting under lamplight. Not too dark, not too light. Perfect. She handed it to the tallest man. He lifted it beneath his hood and swallowed deep. "It's strong," he coughed. "It's homebrew," she murmured. "A recipe from my mama." The others eagerly held out their cups. One by one, she filled them. One by one, they drank. And one by one, something subtle shifted, barely visible yet unmistakable to anyone who watched closely. The tall one leaned against her table. "Widow, you gon' pour yourself a drink, or you just watching us?" Lila's smile widened, a slow blooming thing, almost tender. "I don't drink no more." "Why not?" he slurred. "Because when I drink," she said softly, "I remember too much." The smallest of the men stumbled, his hood tilted sideways. "What?" "What was in?" He didn't finish. His body lurched as if someone pushed him from behind, though no one had moved. Another man laughed nervously. "Y'all drunk already?" "We barely had a cup." Lila stepped backward, her shadow stretching long across the floor. She had not poisoned them. Not exactly. Poison was too quick. She had brewed something else, something old, something her grandmother whispered about while weaving charms to keep spirits from stalking the door. It wasn't meant to kill outright. It was meant to unhook the mind, unravel the senses, peel men down to their trembling, frightened cores. A man dropped to his knees, clutching his throat though he could still breathe. Another clawed at his hood as if invisible hands tightened around it. The tallest one staggered forward, grabbing Lila's arm. "What did you do?" She leaned close, her lips near his ear. "I gave you what you gave my husband." Confusion flickered in his eyes. Then horror. Then recognition. One by one, their bodies rebelled. Muscles twitched. Voices cracked. The room filled with groans, curses, desperate gasps for clarity. Their legs buckled. Their masks slipped. Fear split open their bravado like rotten wood. "You ain't dying," Lila said calmly, watching them collapse like men who'd been starved of mercy. "Not yet." She lifted the jug again, swirling the dark liquid. "The drink don't kill fast, it kills slow. First your sight, then your breath, then your heartbeat." Her voice was whisper smooth. "But before that, it makes you see the truth." The man on the ground convulsed. "Truth. That Samuel never begged," Leela said. "Not once. But I hope y'all do." Their limbs spasmed. Their voices cracked. The hut trembled with their suffering. Lila stepped outside, letting the night wind cool her skin. Behind her, the men shrieked, some choking, some praying, some calling for mothers who would have been ashamed of them. She looked up at the moon, glowing steady and white. "Samuel," she thought. "They're starting to pay." But she didn't smile yet. Not fully. Not until it was over. And it wasn't over. Not for another 8 heartbeats. Not for another 8 deaths. The screams inside Lila's hut tore through the pine woods like the wails of dying beasts. Owls went silent. Even the wind seemed to shrink back. Lila stood outside, leaning against a rough post, arms folded calmly across her chest. Inside, chaos rattled the walls. It started with frantic thrashing boots scraping the floor, chairs overturning, men clawing at anything solid as if the earth beneath them had liquefied. Then came the choking, the ragged, wet gulps for air. And beneath all of it, the sound that chilled even Lila. Laughter. Not hers. Not free laughter, but desperate, broken laughter, the kind that erupts when men finally see the monsters hiding inside their own ribs. She could hear them shouting names, each man calling out to another, as if someone else in the room might save him. But their voices tangled, slurred, screamed over one another until they dissolved into pure panic. Lila waited. She had learned patience, young when to speak, when to listen, when to remain as silent as a blade. Tonight, she held silence close, like a shroud. After a while, the tallest man, the one who had spoken boldest, crawled to the doorway. His hood had fallen off. His face was flushed, his eyes wild, reflecting flame and terror. "Widow," he gasped. "Help. Help us." Lila stepped forward slowly, her shadow falling over him. "You want mercy," she said, "but you ain't got the stomach for justice." He tried to grab her ankle, but his fingers twitched uselessly. She pulled her leg back, watching him writhe like a worm on hot stone. "What did you give us?" he begged. Lila knelt beside him, lifting his chin with one finger. "You remember 4 nights ago," she murmured. "The swamp, the lantern light, the screams." His lips trembled. We were drunk." "And Samuel wasn't," she snapped. The man squeezed his eyes shut, as if he could block out the memory or her voice. "What I gave you," Lila continued, soft as river mud, "ain't poison. It's a mirror." A shudder rippled through him. He tried to speak, but only foam touched his lips. Inside the hut, one of the men shrieked so loud the walls quivered. Another's voice broke into a hysterical hymn, half prayer, half delirious plea. "Why, ain't you drinking?" The tall man choked. Lila's eyes went distant. "Because I wanted to stay clear enough to watch every one of y'all go." A hot tear slid down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. He fell onto his back, limbs jerking. His chest rose, heaved, then stalled. Lila placed a hand over his heart. Slow, slower, stopped. "1 down," she whispered. 7 left. Inside, the second man collapsed beside the fire pit. His face purpled, his breath throaty and shallow. Lila dragged his body with a surprising steadiness. Her grief had given her strength she didn't know she possessed. She laid him beside the tall one, then went back inside. The hut smelled of sweat, fear, bile, and smoke. The men moved in disjointed jerks, like marionettes whose strings had been cut but still twitched from memory. One had torn off his hood and was clawing at the air as if swarms of insects crawled over him. "They ain't real," Lila said, stepping past him. "That's just your conscience buzzin'. Must feel strange to finally have one." He tried to lunge at her, but his legs buckled. He hit the floor hard. By the time she checked his pulse, It fluttered like a moth's wing, then faded. Two more staggered against each other, clutching their throats, their voices merging into a grotesque duet. "You think y'all strong," Lila murmured, watching them sink to their knees. "But strength ain't what a man shows when he holds a gun. It's what he shows when he meets the truth." One collapsed, then the other. Lila did not move, did not flinch, did not blink. Outside, she dragged them into a row, 4 bodies, each stiffening under the moonlight. Sweat glistened on her brow, but her breathing stayed even. Halfway done, back inside, only 4 remained, and these were the worst of them. She remembered their voices from the swamp, each one dripping with cruelty. One man was sobbing into his hands. Another crawled toward the wall, as if escaping through wood was an option. The third was praying again, now louder, beseeching a god he had ignored his whole life. The fourth, the dirtiest of them, still had enough venom left to spit. "You're a demon," he growled, though his words slurred together. Lila approached him calmly. "Maybe. But demons don't create themselves. Men do." He tried to swing at her, but his arm fell limp before it reached her. He collapsed, breath rattling like wind through dead leaves. Within seconds, he stilled. 3 left. The praying man crawled toward her feet, gripping her ankle. His eyes were watery, his lips trembling. "Forgive us, Lila stepped out of his grasp. "You prayed while killing Samuel too," she said. "Didn't stop your hand then. Won't stop mine now." He gasped, convulsed, and went still. 2 left. The sobbing man clutched at her dress. "I didn't hurt him," he cried. "I just watched." "That's worse," Lila said simply. His chest seized. Then silence. 1 left. The final man, the one crawling at the wall, was the quietest. Fear had stolen his voice. He clung to the wooden boards as if he could melt into them. Lila approached him slowly, her footsteps soft. "You ain't fightin' the drink," she said. "You fightin' the memory. 'Cause it's comin' back, ain't it?" The way Samuel screamed. He froze. His breath hitched. His fingers dug deep into the cracks. "Say his name," Lila demanded. He shook his head. "Say his name." His voice cracked into a whisper. "Samuel, A." Then he convulsed violently, collapsing to the floor. His heartbeat stuttered, then faded into stillness. Lila stood there, watching the last of the 8 bodies settle into death's quiet. Slowly, her shoulders dropped, her breath softened, her eyes glistened. "It's done," she whispered. But somewhere inside her, something darker whispered back, "Not yet." The sun rose pale and sickly the next morning, its light creeping reluctantly over the pines, over the silent clearing, over 8 bodies lying in a row still, stiff, and strangely peaceful. Birds circled above but did not land. Even scavengers approached timidly, sensing the human scent still clinging to the air. Lila stood before the corpses, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. For a woman who had just orchestrated the deaths of 8 men, she looked neither triumphant nor shaken. Instead, she looked hollow, like a drum whose skin had been stretched too thin. She stared at the bodies as though waiting for one of them to rise and tell her this nightmarish world was finally done with her. But none did. A crunch of leaves behind her made Lila turn sharply. It was the last person she wanted to see. A slender girl stood at the tree line, barefoot, wide-eyed, clutching something pressed to her chest. Her hair was braided neatly, but her clothes were worn thin. She couldn't have been more than 17. "Ruth," Lila whispered. Ruth had been Samuel's youngest sister. She had Samuel's eyes dark, quiet, observant, always seeing more than she should. Lila's breath caught. She hadn't planned for this. Ruth wasn't supposed to be here. The girl stepped closer, her gaze glued to the bodies. She swallowed hard. Is it true? What they said?" Lila clenched her shawl. "What did they say?" "That 8 Klansmen came into the woods last night." Ruth's voice trembled. "And ain't nobody seen 'em since." Lila exhaled slow, careful. "What are you doing out this far, child? Ain't safe." Ruth hesitated. Her next words came out like stones falling from her throat. "I heard their voices last night." She pointed toward the hut. "Screamin'. Sounded like the end of the world." Lila's jaw tightened. Ruth looked at Lila then, really looked, reading her face the way Samuel used to. "You did it," she whispered. Lila closed her eyes. "They hurt Samuel," the girl continued. "And you made sure they paid." Lila turned sharply. "I ain't do it for vengeance." "Then what?" Ruth asked softly. Lila paused. Her voice came out hoarse. "For peace." Ruth looked over the bodies again. "Does it feel peaceful?" Lila didn't answer. Ruth moved closer and slowly dropped the object she'd been holding. It hit the dirt with a soft thud. A folded shirt, Samuel's work shirt, patched at the elbows. Lila's breath hitched. "You kept it," Lila murmured. Ruth nodded. "Mama wanted to bury it after what they did. But I couldn't." Lila knelt and picked up the shirt, clutching it with both hands. It still smelled faintly of smoke and pine tar, the scent Samuel always carried after long days splitting timber. The weight of the shirt alone was enough to bring tears she had long buried. Ruth spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I came to find you last night, but when I saw the men go toward your hut, I hid." Lila's head snapped up. "You were here?" Ruth nodded, trembling. "I was up in the trees. I saw him knock on your door. Heard him laughing. Then I heard you laughing." Lila stiffened. "Ruth, I ain't judging," the girl said quickly, "but I heard everything." Lila swallowed hard. The air suddenly felt heavy. Ruth stepped closer until she stood directly in front of her. "Those men were demons. Everyone knew it. You just did what the sheriff never would." Lila shook her head. "This ain't something you praise, child." "Why not?" "Because death sticks to the soul." Lila pressed a palm to her chest. "And I can feel it sticking to mine." Ruth's eyes glistened. "So what you gonna do now?" Lila looked around at the clearing, the hut, the bodies, the trees still standing, silent witness. "I'm gonna move 'em," she said finally. "Burn the hut. Make sure no one finds nothing." Ruth nodded slowly. "I'll help." "No." Lila's voice was sharp. "You need to go home." Ruth didn't move. "I ain't leaving you." "Ruth," Lila whispered, "you still got a future. A good one, if you don't ruin it by standing with me." The girl trembled. "But you're all I got left." The truth of that hit Lila deep, far deeper than any blade could. She pulled the girl into her arms, holding her tightly, burying her face in Ruth's hair. "You got more future than I ever did," Lila murmured. "Don't tie it to my ghosts." Ruth pulled back, eyes wet. "I ain't scared." "As so." Lila cupped her cheek. "You should be." But before Lila could say more, the distant sound of hooves thundered through the trees. Both froze. Ruth's eyes widened. "Someone's coming." Lila's heartbeat leapt. "Get in the trees now." Ruth obeyed instantly, climbing the nearest pine with nimble speed. Lila stepped forward, standing tall before the row of corpses, Samuel's shirt clutched in her fist. Hoofbeats grew louder, too loud. Not one horse, several. Lila's pulse hammered. The men who came would not be like the 8 lying dead. They would be sober, armed, enraged. The first rider broke through the trees, a deputy's star glinting on his vest. Behind him, 4 others followed. They froze when they saw the bodies. And Lila, standing before them, unarmed, unmoving, unapologetic. The deputy lifted his rifle. "You got 3 seconds, he warned, voice cracking, "to tell me what in God's name happened here." Lila inhaled, slow, steady, like she had nothing left to fear, because she didn't. "They came here to kill me," she said. "And they failed." The deputy's eyes widened. The others cursed under their breath. And in the tree above, Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth, praying Lila's next words would not seal her fate. But Lila had already stepped forward, her voice clear, calm, and fatal. "And if y'all came to finish what they started, I'll let the Lord sort out the rest." The deputy kept his rifle leveled at Lila's chest, but she didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't even breathe heavy. She stood like a tree that had survived 5 storms and wasn't about to bow for a 6th. Behind her, the bodies of 8 Klansmen lay in a crooked row, pale in the morning light, their faces frozen, their throats stiff and dry, their lips stained by the poisoned wine they'd drunk with laughter. The deputy swallowed and shifted in his saddle. "Don't you move," he warned. Lila didn't. Wind rustled through the pines. A few leaves broke loose and fluttered down like bits of burned paper. The forest felt tense, alive, like it was holding its breath with her. Another rider, a thick-necked man with a red mustache, nudged his horse closer. "Deputy Price," he muttered, "that there is Widow Lila. She ain't no danger. The danger's layin' dead behind her." Lila turned her head slightly. "Then you best lower that rifle." Price hesitated, and in his hesitation, Lila saw the truth. He was terrified of her, not because she was armed, not because she was threatening, because she wasn't afraid of dying. Men like Price didn't know what to do with someone who had nothing left to lose. He cleared his throat. "We got reports of hollerin', scream." Lila cut him off. "You want the truth? Or the story you came ready to believe?" The other riders exchanged looks. Price frowned. "The truth." Lila nodded once. "Then listen." She stepped a little to the side, revealing the bodies fully. Sunlight hit the men's faces, faces that had terror etched into them like carving marks. "They came here drunk," Lila began. "Came knocking on my door after midnight. They told me I was going to pay for living alone. Pay for speaking out when Samuel died. Pay for breathin', far as they were concerned." "Is it so?" The men shifted uncomfortably. "Samuel was one of us," the mustached rider muttered. "Didn't deserve." Lila whipped her gaze toward him. "You think the men who killed Samuel were strangers? Outsiders?" Her voice dropped into a soft, venomous whisper. "They were these men." Mustache reddened. "You sure of that?" Lila lifted Samuel's patched shirt. The fabric trembled in her hands, but she held her voice steady. "Samuel wore this the night they hunted him," she said. "I found it torn by the river. These men bragged about it, called him an uppity boy, laughed about the way he ran." Price's jaw tightened. His hands twitched around the rifle grip. "They bragged about killing him," Lila continued. "And last night, they came here to brag again. Thought I'd cry. Thought I'd beg." She tilted her chin. "I gave 'em wine instead." A silence fell so thick and heavy it felt like fog sinking into the lungs. Price finally spoke, voice hoarse. "You poisoned 'em." "I gave them a choice," Lila corrected. "They drank it." One of the younger riders looked sick. "Why? Why would they drink wine you gave 'em?" Lila shrugged softly. "Because they were men who thought they couldn't die." The truth of it sent a murmur through the group. Price lowered his rifle just an inch, but enough for Lila to breathe again. "Even so," he said quietly, 8 dead white men. That ain't something the county's gonna overlook." Lila nodded. "I know. Folks'll call it murder. I know. Some'll call for a hangin'. I know. Then why'd you do it?" Lila finally looked him straight in the eye. "Because I'd rather die free than live in fear." Price froze. The men behind him averted their eyes, the words cutting deeper than bullets. A soft rustle came from above. Lila didn't dare look up, but she knew Ruth was still hiding in the tree, watching with trembling hands over her mouth. She prayed none of the riders noticed. Price sighed heavily. "Lila, the sheriff will want to question you." "I'll come peacefully," she said. "Ain't running." That surprised him. "Why?" "Because if I run," Lila murmured, "they'll burn every colored cabin from here to Montgomery looking for me." Silence again. The mustached rider cleared his throat. "Then, let's take her in." But Price didn't move. His eyes scanned the bodies again, lingering on each one. "These weren't God-fearing men," he muttered. "Weren't law-fearing neither. Half the town hated him. Other half was scared of him." He stepped off his horse. Lila's heart thudded. Price knelt beside the nearest corpse. He examined the purple lips, the stiff tongue, the dry stains. Then he looked up at his riders. "You see slash marks?" he asked. "No." "Bullet holes?" "No." "Knife wounds?" "No." Price stood slowly and turned back to Lila. "They died of drinking. That's what I see." Lila stared. Price mounted his horse again. "And no law in this county says a woman is responsible for what a drunk fool puts in his own mouth." Mustache gawked. "But deputy, this is my call," Price snapped. "We ain't making a martyr out of 8 men the Lord already judged." He turned to Lila one last time. "Widow, go home." Lila blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Price tipped his hat. "But bury him deep. And don't speak of this again." Lila nodded slowly. "I won't." Price spurred his horse, but before he rode off, he said over his shoulder, "And widow? Yes? Whatever you put in that wine." His voice dropped low. "Make sure you never use it again." Lila held his gaze. "I won't need to." He nodded. Then they rode away, leaving the clearing silent again. Ruth climbed down from the tree the moment they were gone, tears streaking her face. "Lila," she whispered, You're free." Lila shook her head. "No," she murmured, looking at the hut, the bodies, the ashes of the fire. "Freedom don't come that easy." She picked up a shovel. "But today is the first step." And Ruth stepped beside her, picking up another. Together, under the quiet pines, they began burying 8 men and the fear that had ruled their lives. Night folded over the plantation like a heavy quilt, thick and suffocating. Yet inside the widow house, Sarah stood straighter than she had in 20 years. She had scrubbed blood from her floorboards, burned the Klansmen's stained clothing, and polished every copper pot until she could see her reflection shining back, a reflection she no longer feared. 8 graves now dotted the far edge of the woods, shallow and silent. No one suspected the widow had fed death to her visitors. Not yet. But the world outside her door had begun to whisper. Sheriff Garrison rode up the following morning, boots dusty, face set with suspicion. His horse pawed the ground anxiously as though it smelled something buried that should not be touched. "Ma'am," he called, tipping his hat in a gesture that felt too polite to trust. "Heard you had visitors yesterday. Didn't see 'em ride back into town." Sarah opened the door, slow, calm as rippling water. She wiped her hands on her apron, then folded them neatly. "They left after dark," she said. "Didn't seem like the sort who'd want escorting." Garrison studied her eyes, searching for cracks, but Sarah held steady. A lifetime of forced silence had taught her how to lie without trembling. "Horses didn't pass through the road," he said. "Maybe they took to the woods." She lifted one shoulder in a lazy shrug, as though the matter barely stirred her mind. Her heart, however, thudded hard enough to bruise bone. The sheriff sniffed the air, frowning. "Smells like ash. You been burning something?" "Old furniture," she answered. "Rotten wood attracts insects. I don't care for creatures crawling over my floors." He shifted, dissatisfied. "If you see any of those men again, you best tell me." "If I see anyone, you'll know," she replied. He tipped his hat again, but his eyes lingered a snake circling, waiting for a weak spot. Finally, he rode off, and Sarah's breath left her in slow shivers. The danger had begun. By midday, 2 wagons pulled into her yard, wives, sons, and cousins of the dead men. Their faces were pale with worry, though none dared admit to fear for men who rode in white hoods. "Miss Sarah," a thin woman named Clara said, wringing her hands. "Caleb didn't return last night. He came here first, didn't he?" Sarah smiled gently, too gently. "He surely did. They drank my wine, talked too loud, laughed too much. Men like that often wander." A young boy no more than 10 stepped closer. "My pa ain't ever wandered." "That so?" Sarah crouched down, her voice softening. "Then maybe he stopped somewhere else. Maybe he'll be home by nightfall." But the boy shook his head. "My pa said bad things happen in these woods." Sarah held his gaze, and a slow, aching memory surfaced. Her own lost child, snatched by the auction block before he ever took a first step. Pain flared through her chest. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead, a small kindness she could never give her own blood. "Your pa should have known better than to follow shadows," she murmured. Clara stiffened. "Shadows?" Sarah rose. "Darkness always follows a wicked man." Their eyes widened. She realized she should not have said it, but something in her had grown tired of shrinking. "Search the woods if you want," Sarah continued. "But be careful. The night keeps what it wants." They left uneasy, glancing back at her as though she were the ghost haunting the land. Perhaps she was. As the sun dipped, Sarah walked to the slave quarters. Conversations halted at her approach, not out of fear, but awe. She was no longer the quiet widow who stitched blankets. She had become a legend in a single night. Old Moses rocked forward on his stool. "Woman, you glowing," he whispered. "Like you swallowed lightning." Sarah smiled sadly. Lighting burns, Moses. Then let it burn what it need to. The old man rasped. You done something big, didn't you? The younger slaves leaned in. Sarah lowered her voice. 8 men who came to scare me. Won't be scaring anyone else. Gasps rose. One woman crossed herself. Another bit her lip so hard blood welled. You killed Klansmen? A boy whispered, trembling. Sarah shook her head sharply. Lower your voice. And don't say killed. Say ended. A slow murmur swept through the group. You did what we all been dreaming. An older woman whispered. Sarah lifted her chin. I did what their own cruelty led them to. And if any more come, they'll find the same fate. For the first time in years, the quarters felt alive, not with fear, but with something dangerous and bright. Hope. Late that night, the plantation owner, Master Alden, stormed to her house. His face was red, swollen with fury. You been causing trouble, he shouted. Garrison says you're the last to see them men alive. What did you do? Sarah stepped forward, the lantern light catching the iron set calm in her eyes. I poured wine. I cleaned up after fools. That is all. Alden slammed a fist against her doorframe. If them men don't show by dawn, I'll blame you. Sarah tipped her head. You blame me for everything else. Why stop now? He froze. She had never spoken back to him. Not once in all her years here. You're getting bold, he whispered. No, Sarah corrected, voice low and deadly. I'm done being afraid. Alden stepped closer, face twisted with an ugly mix of fear and rage. What happened to my obedient little widow? Sarah's smile chilled the air. She died, she said. About the same hour your friends did. And I will. For a heartbeat, he stopped breathing. Then he backed away. Not because he believed her guilty, but because he finally realized she could be. When Alden retreated into the darkness, a strange, quiet triumph settled over Sarah. She closed the door, bolted it, rested her forehead against the wood. The world was shifting. Rumors were rising. Danger brewed on every side. And yet, for the first time, she felt powerful. The widow who once cried into her pillow now stood tall enough to cast a shadow over every man who'd ever hurt her. But shadows attract more shadows, and the night was far from done with her. Tomorrow, the hunters would come, and Sarah would be ready. Dawn broke pale and thin, the kind of morning where silence felt like a warning rather than peace. Sarah stood on her porch, arms folded, watching fog roll over the fields like spilled milk. The earth beneath the mist hid 8 shallow graves, 8 secrets the land wasn't sure it could hold. She sensed it before she heard it, a tremor in the distance, a faint thudding, rhythmic as a war drum. Horses. The hunters were coming. 10 men rode toward her house, white hoods pulled over their heads, lanterns swinging from their saddles. They moved in a line, silent as ghosts. None spoke, none laughed. Their solemnity was worse than any shout. These were not the careless, drunk brutes who had visited her days before. These were the men who came to find bodies. At their front rode a man Sarah recognized even under the hood, Elias Hartwell, the clan's elected commander, a title he awarded himself with all the pomp of a child playing king. He stopped his horse directly before her porch. Widow Sarah, he said, his voice dripping false politeness. You know why we're here. Sarah held his stare. I know you don't come early unless you bring trouble. One of the riders shifted, another spat on the ground. 8 of our brothers vanished, Hartwell said. Last seen drinking your wine. Sarah let a thin smile slip. Then maybe your brothers can't hold their liquor. The men bristled. Nervous fingers twitched toward guns. Hartwell dismounted, boots crunching on gravel as he approached the steps. We will search your home, he said. Your yard. Your cellar. Every inch of this place until we find what we need. Sarah stepped down one stair, then another until she stood eye to eye with the hooded man. My home is my own, she whispered, and you'll search nothing without cause. Hartwell leaned forward. We don't need cause. She didn't blink. Then you won't find anything. The men poured into her home like locusts opening cabinets, ripping up floor mats, dumping drawers, overturning tables. Her tidy kitchen became a storm of boots and curses. One man pried open a jar of preserves, sniffed, and tossed it to the floor. The glass shattered, red jelly staining the boards like blood. Another pulled down her curtains. Another opened her sewing chest, throwing years of careful stitching into a heap. Sarah stood in the doorway, unmoving, watching the destruction with an eerie calm. She had lived her whole life bending under the hands of white men. Today, she stood carved from stone. A younger clansman, barely more than a boy, approached her, trembling. You're awful calm for someone being searched," he stammered. Sarah tilted her head. "That's because you'll find nothing I don't want you to." The boy swallowed hard and backed away. In the cellar, boots thumped. Metals scraped. Shovels cracked against the packed earth as they probed her foundations like graveyard thieves. Hartwell emerged, face flushed with frustration. "No bodies," he muttered. "Because you're looking in the wrong place," Sarah replied sweetly. He froze, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" I said. She repeated slowly. "Maybe your brothers chose a path you don't walk." Hartwell yanked off his hood. His face was square, pink-skinned, with small, mean eyes and a jaw clenched like a fist. Without the hood, he looked less terrifying, just another man angry he didn't have control. "You're playing a dangerous game, widow," he whispered. Sarah stepped closer. "So are you. You think a woman like you scares me?" "I think," she said, voice low and unshakable, "I scare you more than you expected." A ripple of unease spread through the men. Some shifted on their feet. Others exchanged glances. No one touched her. Hartwell's lips tightened. "If you're hiding something, we'll find it." "Search the whole plantation," Sarah said. "Turn every stone, dig up every fence post. You'll find nothing but dirt and your own shadows." Hartwell stared hard, as if trying to peel her open with his eyes. Then he turned. "Mount up," he barked. We searched the woods. The riders headed toward the tree line, the very place Sarah prayed they wouldn't go. She followed at a distance, walking slowly, head high. She didn't run. Running was guilt. Running was fear. She walked like a woman with the earth on her side. The men spread out, dragging lanterns through the underbrush. Shovels sank into soil. Dogs barked, sniffing, circling. Sarah clenched her hands behind her back. If they dug even a foot too far left, if the earth shifted since last night, if the wind carried the wrong scent, but the land held its silence. The graves remained hidden by roots and leaves, protected by the one thing the clansmen feared most. Nature they couldn't control. After an hour of fruitless searching, Hartwell slammed his shovel into the ground. "They ain't here," he snarled. Sarah stepped forward. "Perhaps the forest kept them." One clansman shivered. "This place feels cursed." "Maybe it is," she answered. Hartwell approached her again, 2 feet away, breath hot with fury. "If we find out you had anything to do with this, anything, you'll hang." Sarah met his threat with an icy smile. "Hanging is a fate reserved for the guilty," she said, "not the clever." His nostrils flared. He lifted his hand ready to strike her, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the steady way she met his eyes. Maybe it was fear of touching a woman who felt untouchable. Or maybe it was the growing murmur among his own men. "Leave her. This land ain't right." Hartwell lowered his hand. "This isn't over," he hissed. Sarah's voice was soft as velvet, sharp as a blade. "No," she said, "it isn't. Not for me, and certainly not for you." At last, Hartwell mounted his horse. One by one, the others followed, their lanterns flickering like dying stars as they rode away from the widow house. Not one looked back. Sarah stood alone in the clearing, wind lifting the hem of her dress. She waited until the last hoofbeat faded before allowing her body to tremble just once. Then she exhaled, slow, deep, free. 8 men were dead. 10 more were hunting ghosts. And Sarah? She was no longer prey. She was becoming something far more dangerous. A legend whispered in fear, a shadow that laughed back at the dark. A widow who fed death to her enemies and watched calmly as they swallowed it. The hunters had come in white, but they would leave in black. Because Sarah was not done, not even close. Night fell like ink across the widow house, pulling shadows long and thin across the yard. Lanterns swung in the breeze. Though no one lit them, Sarah didn't need light to see. She could feel every sound, every movement of the earth underfoot, every shiver in the trees. Tonight was not for sleep. Tonight was for reckoning. Word traveled fast through the forest and the hills. Whispers of what the widow had done, the wine, the 8 men had reached every corner of the surrounding plantations. Some came out of fear. Some came out of curiosity. Others came for vengeance. Sarah didn't care which was which. She had prepared her yard, her house, her very land for this moment. Lanterns lined the paths, but they were empty of fire. Shadows formed shapes of their own, dancing in the moonlight as if the night itself obeyed her command. A soft knock at the door. She opened it to see a single figure standing in the fog. A man in a hood, but not the white hood of the clan. This one was darkened, more subdued, but with eyes that gleamed like sharpened steel. "You're expecting us," he said. Sarah's lips curved into a smile. "I am, but I was expecting a dozen." The man's eyes widened slightly. He had heard of the widow's cunning, but now he would see it firsthand. "We didn't know. We didn't believe." Sarah held up a hand. "No one believes until they see. Tonight, you will." The yard became a stage. Tables of rough wood held nothing edible, nothing tangible, but the men didn't notice. Shadows danced across the boards, moving as if alive. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices that weren't there. From inside, Sarah emerged, holding a simple decanter. She poured into cups placed on the table. The liquid glimmered like black mercury. The men leaned forward, driven by greed and curiosity, each thinking they could outwit her. They drank. At first, nothing happened. Just the bitter taste, a chill that crept along their spines. Then came a sound, soft at first, like the hum of a choir, rising in a chorus that filled the night. 8 voices, singing through the darkness. 8 men they knew had vanished. 8 mouths they would never hear speak again, but now their voices rose, cold and pure, weaving around the living in harmony. The men froze. Panic began to ripple through them. Lanterns flickered as if the shadows themselves inhaled, expanding and contracting around the terrified figures. Sarah stepped forward, arms lifted. Her eyes burned in the moonlight. One scarred, one clear, both reflecting the wrath and cunning of a woman who had mastered death itself. "Look around," she whispered. "This land knows your sins. These shadows are not mine, they are yours, your own greed, your own cruelty. And tonight, they dine on it." A tremor ran through the yard. Lanterns swung violently. The earth shivered, sending small clouds of dust into the air. Each man felt as though invisible hands clawed at their ankles, their chests, their very hearts. Some fell to their knees. Some screamed. Others tried to flee, but the yard had grown, the trees bending subtly to block every path. Every shadow stretched and shifted, forming shapes they recognized but wished they didn't, faces of the dead, eyes accusing, mouths open in silent screams. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. "Drink deeper. Listen closer. Remember the 8 you killed, the 8 who are now your ghosts." One by one, the men collapsed, convulsing as though possessed by visions they could not comprehend. They heard whispers of their own sins, the women they harmed, the slaves they struck, the laughter they silenced. And through it all, the choir of 8 sang relentlessly, their song a dirge that would not end until justice had been felt in every trembling body. Sarah walked among them, calm, collecting each man's gaze and holding it like a mirror. "You thought death was the end," she said. "But for me, for this land, death is only a beginning. And your beginning ends here." A final tremor shook the yard. Lanterns fell, splintering. Shadows collapsed into the soil, and when the night grew still, nothing remained of the 10 men but their terror and a faint, lingering hum, the harmony of those 8 who had been wronged, echoing through the fog forever. Morning broke with a quiet the widow had not felt in years. No birds, no wind, no sound but the occasional drip of dew from the trees. The yard was empty except for Sarah, standing alone. Her dress was clean, her hands steady, her eyes gleaming. 8 men had vanished from the earth, and 10 more had been haunted beyond their living memory. Sarah turned to the rising sun. She whispered softly, a prayer to no one in particular. "Let them rest, and let those who come after remember. This is my land, my reckoning, my law." And with that, she walked inside, leaving the shadows of the night to dissolve into legend. The story of the widow who fed 8 men to justice spread across plantations, whispered from one trembling mouth to another. Children were warned, grown men trembled, and even the forests seemed to hold their breath when her name was spoken. Sarah had not just survived, she had rewritten what fear could do, and how a single woman could turn terror into triumph. The night belonged to her, and the ghosts, singing still, belonged to her as well.